we'll pray, and then we'll start talking. So the Lord be with you.
And also with
And also with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Holy One, help us to heal the wounds of our world. Open our eyes so that we may see these wounds. Break open our hearts so that we may feel the wounds. And give us the wisdom and the steadfast tenacity that it will take to ensure that our wounds are healed and that the scars will remind us of where we have come from and stand as an impediment to keep us from going backwards. In your blessed name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. And yeah. What do we got there, Daniel? The steadfast tenacity that Tally is talking about. Yeah. Yeah. Although that was not Tally. That was somebody else's dog. So, but I am now realizing that I have not given her DINNER yet. And so I'm hoping I get through this class before she realizes that. So we're gonna start from there. Our question that we left ourselves with last week was, how do we, as people of faith, intentionally and specifically and actively work to live outside the caste system? Put it in the chat. One thing you're doing to intentionally, actively, purposefully work outside the caste system. What do we have? What are we thinking? Okay. Right, showing the wait staff, children, others, always. Church and volunteering. Yeah.
Continuing to educate ourselves about caste is an important thing to do.
Yeah.
To work outside the caste.
Mm-hmm. You got to know what the caste is to be able to work outside of it.
Become more aware of implicit biases.
I'm doing my best to promote and hire against caste.
Quote from Elie Wiesel: "Never allow anyone to be humiliated in your presence."
Yeah. 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 There you go. Teaching in the schools. Yep. How do we show a race of people that they matter? Well, I think, how do we show anyone that someone matters? How do we show anyone that they matter?
Being faithful to the transgressive witness of Jesus.
Woo!
Treating people that matter with respect and dignity is an important assumption, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to treat everyone with respect and dignity. That's the way we let them and others know that they matter.
We're We're fully appreciating the experience of caste, of people who are the outcast. Recognizing privilege.
Boom. All right. Yeah, inequities in the church. Yep. Yeah. Piece of the pie. I have some theology about pies and rivers. We may get into that later. All right. So, how do we spiritually respond to how this book has affected us so far? Frankly, as I was reading this book, I was feeling like I was going to throw up. I had a really hard time getting I'm like, okay, you only have 30 more pages to read. Okay, you only have 20. I was very, very, very much. And I just, I mean, when Sister V, when you think about that, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, for me, my experience of the book was a lot different. I actually found it very affirming and uplifting, because this is a story that just has been erased for so long. This is history that we just don't talk about very much. But, you know, a spiritual response is, we were made in the image of God. Mm-hmm. And God thought that image so precious and so valuable that God was willing to become human, God's self, and live that life and face death to redeem that image in us. I mean, the incarnation is a spiritual response to the caste system, and it's God's response to the caste system.
Yeah, but good, right? And so here's my take on that. And those of you of a certain age may remember Saturday Night Live, right? And you'd say, Jane, you ignorant. We won't do that. But anyway, but like I see that, but what I wonder about is take it farther, because if we talk about that's the incarnation of Jesus, and Jesus has died, and Jesus has risen, and Jesus will come again, and we're still, how could this matter? Because it's still happening.
God never meant to just do this all for us. God was not going to wave a magic wand and say, I'm going to just, make everything right. God expected us to be co-creators of this new reality, this new holy reign, or new kingdom, if you want to use kingdom language, but new holy reign. And we're meant to be part of this work. That's part of our redemption, is, reintegrating our own humanity back into ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we have something to do with this.
And because there's that notion, and you said this to me early on, and she said this, it was like on page 142. Dehumanization distances not only out group from the in group, but those in the in group from their own humanity. Like I don't think Dot saying ashamed to be white. Like I think ideally I don't need to be ashamed to be white. I need to, this has to be about how people are not dehumanized. And I don't need to dehumanize myself. That this is it's a lifting of all to that, I think, that longing for that God has for us in our world.
Bishop.
Yep.
When I'm having the most horrible time reading this book. Yeah. Sometimes I can't get through a page. I'm having all kinds. And Sister V, it does teach me a whole lot. It reaffirms some of the stuff I already knew. It clarifies some of the stuff I thought. But I have tried. I cannot find Christ nowhere. And I can't even pick up anything that's supposed to be religious. I get very, very angry and want to do something bad.
Yeah, I was theologizing all over this book, actually, because this is essentially looking at ourselves and one another and seeing the dignity of every human being and seeking Christ in all people. That's something that we fail to do, and it's something we systematically fail to do, and something the caste system wants to prevent us from doing because it keeps this hierarchy in place. And I think part of, I think Daniel called it the transgressive example of Jesus, is actually looking at other human beings and seeing the image of God, and then treating them like the image of God, and then breaking apart the systems that refuse to treat them like the image of God. I think it's the beginning of a long chain of events acknowledging this reality of the caste system. And so I see in that a continuation of the ministry that Jesus started on earth.
Okay, I'm thinking Brenda's not buying it, but hold an open mind, Brenda. Hold an open mind, friend. And keep pushing back too. Carolyn, you've got your hand raised. Well played for learning how to use the controls on Zoom.
Yes, I thought I agree, all the examples are just, they pile on and it becomes very difficult to read. But I thought the saving grace was the children, that even when there were moments when there were children trying to protect their mother, who then obviously get punished. But I think there is latent humanity in everybody. And I think that's what we're trying to reclaim. I think that is what being white we have had to give up some of our humanity. And we need to very strongly reclaim those pieces of our humanity, our humanness, our fragility, our empathy, our understanding, our complexity, our making mistakes, our forgiving other people, those kind of things. We need to reclaim them because they seem to me really important in the church. If we are to say that's who we're at, we're a forgiving people. We think the best about everybody. We give everybody a second chance. So, and I thought there were some examples of the children knowing it was wrong, and then the children being forced, whether they were white or black, to accept the new status, the caste that they were being directed into. The little girl who had her hands scrubbed with the Brillo pads, the little boy who was playing in the yard, a black and white child in the front yard, and suddenly they have transgressed. I think the innocence that humanity has gotten access to these core central pieces of human kindness. And I think we have to reclaim it very loud, because I think the Episcopal Church has not done a very good job. We don't trust children, we don't trust women, we don't trust, we're a very patriarchal, rules or organized system. So I think we have a lot of work to do as the Episcopal Church.
I think, and as a group writ large, and as individuals, I have to say, friends, the pillars that I had to look in the mirror and go, oh, that just hit me in the eye. That to be fair, friends, wasn't just the atrocities, it was my own atrocities. I gotta say, there I am. Carol, you two have raised your hand in a Zoom-like fashion, friend.
Well, this works too, but the one response that really struck me in these chapters had to do with the gentleman from India who was interacting with Ms. Wilkerson and saying to her what he was told was that God had created the caste system. And how many times have those words, or the functional equivalent of those words, been either spoken or unspoken in ways that another generation is poisoned with them. And that's I mean, we look sometimes to young people with hope that they will be able to do differently. But I think we need to be particularly conscious of what messages they're getting and how that will tend to perpetuate the kinds of evil that have gone on for many generations. And the sins of our forebears are certainly being visited upon us.
Yep. Yep. Which that when you talked about the Indian gentleman saying that he had always been told that God created the caste, I believe that brings us to pillar 1. So which in the 8 pillars, actually, Sister V, go for it. This is your question, and I love it. I clarify it. She's like,
Yeah, I mean, which of those 8 pillars of caste, and that was difficult reading. Which stood out to you the most, but what did you struggle with the most?
yeah, Dot.
I just want to say we're awful quiet tonight, and I wonder if it's just because we're all wrestling with what we read. I mean, these 8 pillars were really brutal, all of them. So what stuck out the most? The discussion of endogamy and controlling breeding by the...
Tally suddenly got very interested in the book discussion.
That's an opinion. So.
I'm sorry, that's my neighbor's dog. She's, but anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I think it's really a lot. It was very painful. I kept saying, how many more pages? It was really gruesome, and it's like, and it's happening under our noses, and yet I don't see it happening. I hope I would be that person that would step in, but I don't know. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
It's still happening. I had, I said something to Sister V, and I was like, oh my God. And Sister V, I said, what did I say? I can't imagine living this. And I think I heard you say, I can't imagine not living this.
Yeah. And then I shared the story of why I'm a Michigander.
Yeah.
Bishop Connie.
Yeah. So I know why I'm a Michigander. I'm a Michigander because I got called in an election. How come you're a Michigander?
I'm a Michigander because my grandfather had to run away from a lynch mob in Alabama. He challenged the caste system. He was about 16 years old. He had worked for another landowner for an entire summer because he wanted to save up money to buy a new suit. Remember, he's a 16-year-old kid. But in that system, the landowner could choose to pay him whatever he wanted. And the landowner chose to pay him much less than was promised. And my grandfather said, that's not fair. I'm going to go to this man and demand what he promised me. Just that demand to be treated fairly was enough to raise a lynch mob against him. Mm-hmm. They got tipped off to the lynch mob. They hid him in a field for an entire day until they could find someone who could literally drive him north here to Detroit, where 2 of his older brothers already were. And so that's why I was born in Michigan instead of in Alabama, is because he had to literally flee for his life within a matter of hours, because this caste system said, you are not one of the people who can demand to be treated this equally or with respect or with dignity. So that's why I'm a Michigander.
Dot, you've had your hand up?
Yeah, some words that stick out to me that I struggled with. Artificial, presumed sovereignty over Africans. And on page 112, there's a Southern physician back in 1940 who expressed a commonly held view, and it states, everyone knows that, and I don't think God meant for a superior race like the whites to blend with an inferior race. And what I struggle with that from the standpoint, what a load of crap that is. I'm sorry, to be blunt, to know what God thinks. No one knows what God thinks or even means. We interpret to our own selfish standards, and that's how this whole artificial system came about.
Yeah, we created a God in our own image.
Yeah,
in the image that was in the image that was convenient. Well, the image that was convenient to white landowning men. That was the God that was created, and we shaped theology, or theology was shaped to support their place in the hierarchy. And that's how religion can be very badly misused.
So I've got Cindy Corner, and then I saw Helen Santee, and then Brenda Philpot. Cindy?
I didn't get my book until late, so I haven't read what we were supposed to read for today, but I have read the first couple chapters. The thing that struck me was this all started with Christianity. That the first caste system was, were you Christian or weren't you? And when the African Americans started becoming Christians, they had an issue. They had to come up with something different to separate them. And that really struck me and hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Helen Santee, and then Brenda?
Sister V reminded me of the quote that I wrote down from Inherit the Wind, that God created man in his own image, and man, being a gentleman, returned the compliment.
Good.
And complete with flaws. Our definition of God tends to match up with our own flaws, so that we find a way to reinforce what we think we want out of life.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah. And wow, blast from the past, Inherit the Wind.
Yeah.
All right, Brenda, what you got, Brenda?
Well, I just wanted to not mention the part where the artificial, I think part of what upsets me is that everything that Isabella writes about in this book is being done today. It has not changed. And just a month ago, a doctor who was dying in the hospital with COVID got enough breath to tell us that they still think that we Black folk have no pain. We don't feel any pain. And she had been begging for pain medicine and other medicines. And 10 minutes before she died, she told us what was happening to her in her own hospital. So we're not human to this day. The eugenics of the 30s and 40s is still being practiced, most definitely in medicine.
Yeah. Joanne Slater had put in the chat earlier that she was more convinced of the power of story and listening to one another and slowing down and intentionally listening to one another. And I think someone else, talked about the need to listen to and understand the experiences of caste, of people in other strata in our caste system. And I think that's part of it is, Isabel Wilkerson, she talks about how, I think the chapter is titled the Long Tentacles of Caste, and how it just moves out into all these other parts of our daily life and our social structures. So medicine, healthcare, housing, economic access, things like that. Yeah, it reaches everywhere.
Yep, I think, Helen, I think you're right there. Believing that Black people don't have pain is probably a cover for justifying the infliction of pain. Certainly was once upon a time. what Urwal? Is it? There you go.
Apple, yeah.
I apologize.
That's okay. Being involved with EFM, it's just this whole book, I saw nothing but brokenness. And I couldn't find anything, really good about it. And it was like, it was just like Brenda said, it was hard to read.
Yeah. 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 So Sister V, you might be in the minority again on this one.
Yeah, I might be the only one who's finding this very uplifting and affirming. So that's okay.
Hi, this is Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. I too truly enjoyed this book. I have recommended it to 4 people. And it connected a lot of dots for me. It affirmed a lot of things that were unspoken. And I've experienced some of what I've read at my job with my supervisor. So it was, I did not find this book hard to, as a matter of fact, I read 50 pages yesterday because I wanted to get caught up. It's extremely necessary because you cannot heal something that you are unwilling to face. And oftentimes pain is difficult to face, but we have to do that. We've been fighting with a scab that every time something hits that scab, it reopens the wound. And I think that's where we are. We cannot run any further from this. There's no more skin left on the bone, really. Every time we hit it, we're going deeper and deeper. And until we truly face it together, it's unfortunate, but this is where we are. And we've been running from this for a long time. So I truly enjoy this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And I love that image. I have this deep abiding sense that just debriding this wound is what needs to happen. Wilma, well played on the hand raising, friend. You know, still
Okay.
that was me.
I read the book about a month and a half ago. Then I went back to reread it again. I had all my tabs in there. And I think this book is excellent. I think it's brilliant. I think it gives context for those who want to do something or understand something. But for those African Americans who may not be the whys of what we're living, it puts certain things for me in context. And I kept wondering, why do police officers put their feet on people's neck? Why do they choke the man? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? And on page 150, she gave me my answer. She said, and then you talk about, and then as it goes back, as the children in the South saw their parents do this to people, and they lived this. And on 150, she says, and she answered my question, a certain kind of violence was part of an unspoken curriculum for generations of children and the dominant caste. White culture desensitized children to racial violence, wrote historian Kristen DeRocher, so they would perpetuate it themselves one day. So the guy what's his name, Derek Chauvin, just didn't wake up and I'm gonna do this. Because if we go back, he killed Floyd. He had other examples of brutality that he got away with. This was nothing new for him. The man that choked the man over a 5-cent cigarette in New York years ago, the man's lying there. You're choking him. You can't see that he's got problems. And then yesterday on the news, and I had to replay it twice to get accurate, 2 Southeast Asian young women moving into their apartment. Somehow they thought that the U-Haul was stolen. So as they pull up early to move in, they get out, the men get them out, had them lie on the ground, arms behind their back. Well, the van was not, well, it had been stolen, but the records were whatever. But I said, wait a minute, it took 5 officers with these 2, one was slight, whatever, laying on the ground, hands behind the back. He put his foot on her shoulder to put her handcuffs on over a U-Haul truck. But then again, I said, she was a Southeast Asian woman, and I looked at her, yep, she was not a white woman. And my question is, if George Floyd had been white with foot beyond his neck, if the guy selling cigarettes had been white, would experience this, and the young women would, and I know what the answer is. She's helped me with it all along. You just don't get like that overnight. You think it's okay behavior. And the civil rights, why is it that when Black people are involved, you got to get that much harsher? You've got to handle it differently. Why is that?
And yeah, and she puts those origins in this caste system and how it gets maintained.
So
I highlighted the quote. It's on page 248, and it's from the anthropologist studying the caste system in the South. And he says, you can't smash the system if you don't understand how it works. And I think that's one reason that I do find this book very uplifting and affirming.
I agree, Sister B. I agree thoroughly. It's a great book, my opinion.
And go for it.
I agree with Wilma's statements, and the pillar that was the most striking to me, as I think to a lot of people, was number 6, just the dehumanization and the stigma, because it's calling for or saying that the dehumanization is really on both sides. So not only are you dehumanizing the subordinate caste, but the dominant caste has to be removed so much from their humanity that they can do these things to another group of people. And we have been so desensitized from this. It was hard for me to believe it because I didn't want to acknowledge that it was true. And, you know, swallowing that pill was hard because I had to open my eyes to, yes, this is true, very true. And then once I did that, I saw all the things that had happened to me in the past. And in some ways, how I had contributed to behaviors that I was unconscious to. But it really pulls you from who you are as a human, and you just live your day-to-day life thinking that these things are okay.
And friends, if you don't know, Anne is one of our newer members of my staff. So
hi everyone.
She's in our transition department and learning all sorts of things about the Episcopal Church, and I might add, offering insights from someone who's new about the Episcopal Church, which is a crack up. But Anne, yay.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me to, I mean, the idea that, you know, part of the difficulty of caste is we're forced into these roles. And Isabel Wilkerson talks about, you know, the roles that we're forced into are meant to make the caste system look like it's sound and that it's acceptable and it's the way things should be. And there are so many layers of those forced roles that, you know, she might be covering later in the book, I don't know, but I mean, some of those are the idea that, you know, as a Black woman, I'm supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to, you know, hold up everybody else. I'm supposed to put my emotions aside and, you know, be that strong pillar and force that, you know, just kind of keeps everyone going and keeps everything together. That's a forced role to play within caste as well. And so it has all these layers to it that, you know, you could probably write a whole other book on it.
And I bet she does.
I want to subtitle the book "In Your Place." You you think of how many times that phrase appears, and that association of yourself as a person with that role or expectation that others have of you, and you may come to have of yourself. What is it that kind of attitude, that kind of phrasing, in your proper place, or are you uppity, or too shy and unspoken? What are you, too white?
Yeah, and Carol, if we think about that, and Kathleen, I see you waving your hand vaguely there, valiantly even. But Carol, I think about it. I mean, if we think about this scripturally, I mean, it's Jesus says, "I call you my friends," right? But he also, when James and John want the good stuff, right? He's also really clear to be a leader, you must be servant of all, and so there's lots going on here, but it's different to choose service than to be smushed and kept into that. Kathleen.
There's such a broad context here that is with me all the time. And that is, there's listening, but before that has to be talking. If we have nobody to listen to, if people don't feel brave enough, feel that they can be recognized to talk, we won't know. And one of the incredible things, I mean, this book and the not that the book was written, but that we're talking about it, and there are people with different experiences talking about it. If we weren't doing that, we wouldn't know. And mostly what I am learning, I mean, I have been very fortunate and challenged living in a multicultural environment most of my life, but there's been so much silence. There are things that I'm learning about what it feels like, the details of experiences of people whose lives have been so different than mine, that is humbling and enlightening, and hopeful. And everything that is being said is, I try to take in as a learning opportunity, and I'm very, very thankful. There are a lot of scary things going on because there are a lot of things that haven't changed, but I choose to feel hopeful.
And I think as a white person, the thing I'm aware of is that this book enables me to immerse myself in something without having to say to my sisters and brothers who happen to be African American, black skin, brown skin, always having to say, tell me, right? This book enables me to learn and to look at it and to feel the discontent. And then I consider it a grace when folks are able and willing and up for offering their stories. But I know for so long, I have been inept in saying, can you tell me about this? Right? I'm just like, oh, for freak's sake, Bonnie, read a book. You can do some of this work, right? And so, I think I know that that's always kind of, I think that's a conundrum that sometimes I, as a white person, can get into, and to be open to listening, but not think that I deserve a story.
I just want to, I didn't mean.
Oh, I know that, Kathleen. I know that.
People need to teach me. It's up to me to hear and to take in at a feeling level.
Yep.
What life is like, the shoes I cannot walk in, but I won't know about if people don't feel that they are able and given encouragement, permission, whatever, to tell me.
Yeah, and Pete, I love what you're saying in the chat. Thank you, Kathleen. That's it. Name it, claim it, tame it. The book names caste as a problem. It opens our eyes and minds. And it's up to us to claim the problem and work to tame it. Okay. Wilma, I see that you've got your hand up, and then Carol, I see that you've got yours up. Yes, Wilma.
Just briefly to go on with what you're saying, Bishop Perry, I think that the beauty of books like this and White Fragility give information and they teach. White Fragility is written from her perspective as a white person in white America, and this her perspective. So anybody can just read both of those and not have to ask someone and digest them on their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all.
And get to read some of the best prose I've seen in years. I mean, as a preacher, oh, I want to revel in some of these paragraphs. Carol.
Oh, I'm off mute. What I find, and I guess it's a challenge, is I'm reading, the book, and you saw my comments. It's atrocious, and I can read White Fragility or whatnot. To me, the power of the story, though, is more like when Brenda and I talk and tell each other our own stories, that it's making the connection with the people who I'm with, or who, in my context, I need to make an effort, to get out of my bubble. And so a challenge I think we have in these sorts of like book studies and whatnot is to not always talk about the book, but to talk about, you said I committed, my atrocities. Well, what is that? I took part in white flight. I've got that story that hangs over me. And so I think that's part of how if we use the words beloved community, it's that thing about, and I'm mixing my metaphors, a friend is somebody who knows all about you and still likes you. That's how we make loving community, is to know of each other deeply and love one another. That's all.
And and I think I was thinking about that in her discussion of our misperceptions of alpha behavior, which I found really fascinating, because I found myself thinking about the difference between a hierarchy and a community. This idea that instead of, this kind of top-down hierarchy, which, a domination system that, we've been forced into because of caste, and we end up fighting each other and exhibiting behavior that's more like bullying and insecurity, and there's only so much, and I've got to get my biggest piece of the pie. That's us being forced into this caste system that pushes us into that kind of relationship with one another. Where if we think of community, it's more honoring one another and one another's gifts, and finding a way for each of those gifts to flourish and work together to make a whole, to make something unified. And so, she was talking about, that kind of system. I was thinking of how we spiritually, we talk about a body of Christ. We talk about community. We talk about all these different but equally beloved and people and parts making up this one whole. And yeah, I was wondering what you guys thought about, that her exploration of what it meant to be, alphas and omegas within a kind of system. How there were there were places where our gifts were meant to flourish, but how maybe we shouldn't see them as one being better than the other.
That's a lot to chew on.
Yeah, I got all theological on you there, sorry.
Carol's gonna wade in. Go for it, Carol. Swinehart.
Unmute here. One thing that struck me, and it doesn't go to the alpha male omega part, I haven't quite gotten there yet, but the point she made, and I think as Bishop Perry said, the eloquence of it was that how this caste approach to life has separated people, those who are maybe on the first step of the ladder and those who are on the ground, when actually the one thing that's been held out for those those of us who have whiter skin is that is the linchpin. That's the superiority, and we don't see, or it seems that many people don't see, that they're being duped, that they're being subverted in this way, and makes it that much more challenging for those folks to get together. It's as I mentioned in the chat earlier, zero-sum game. You know, if this person gains, then I must lose. And that's it's pretty self-defeating. It's also a challenge. How do we bring people together in such a way that they don't feel they must put themselves above or below someone else?
So Carol's hitting on this, and Carol Blackmore is responding to it. And earlier in our time, I said I had some thoughts about pies and rivers. So I want to tell you one of my pieces of theology is it's a river, not a pie. That is, God's grace is not a pie. Whereas if Anne gets a big honking whack of that pie, that I must get a small piece of that pie, but that in fact God's grace is a class 5 raging river, and we all get to drink freely. And that I think we've in our world have begun to think of this as everything is scarce, and if I get something, you don't. And there's this, and I think that's just spiritually not who Jesus Christ calls us to be. But then I wonder about how I then enact that or don't. So my shorthand for it is it's a river, not a pie. Yeah. Dot, you had a thought?
Yeah, I want to just tag on to what Sister V was saying. I'm looking at my Roman Catholic hymnal, and do we all know the song, the Unity song, "We Are Many Parts" by Marty Hogan? And the refrain, in essence, speaks to it just speaks a lot. We are many parts, we are all one body, and the gifts we have, we are given to share. May the spirit of love make us one indeed. One, the love that we share. One, our hope and despair. One, the cross that we bear. Man, if our society can live in community, how different our world would be.
Yeah, and I guess that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, that, you know, God expects us to work on this.
Yeah.
God's not going to do this for us. We can't just suddenly feel, awash in feelings of love and everything's going to be all right. We actually have to get off our butts and get our hands in there and do some really, really hard work, dismantling a system that, as Daniel put it, I love that phrase, Daniel, the transgressive, example of Jesus meant for us to dismantle.
And if we start within the church and do it well, that can be potentially a model for others. And a tough assignment that would be.
I think, friends, it is that point where I find myself looking in the mirror and saying, which of these, now that I see and know, which of these have I unconsciously or consciously abided in? And that how I begin to name that for myself is how I think that begins. The notion is there always has to be some contrition before there can be any absolution.
And Sister V, you can always see things so greatly. How I hear some flickers of how to do this, but everything I have read, everything I know about the human being, the Homo sapien, is that we have always been who we are today. Selfish, take everything, kill everything, get rid of everything. I can't find a time in man's development where there wasn't a hierarchy, where there was somebody on top and a lot on the bottom. Where do we find that wonderful spirit that you have about us and the Lovett community?
Well, I think we all look to the fact that we were created in the image of God as beloved, and God looked at us and said, that is very good. We have obscured that image a lot, Brenda. You're absolutely right. I mean, almost from the beginning, I think we were talking about Cain and Abel last week, but that divine spark that is in each and every one of us was so precious and so valued and thought so beautiful by God that God was willing to become human and just subject God's self to the worst of our treatment in order to redeem that image. God thought that we were worth that. God thought that, we had the ability to change and to become what God intended us to be at creation. And God has that faith in us. Well, yeah, God has that faith in us, and I have to have that faith too.
Okay, very good. Because 2,000 years, we still pretty bad, ugly, vicious people.
But Brenda, there's tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow keeps me going.
All right.
Tomorrow, I hope.
I'm just saying, we have tonight, and we have tomorrow, and we have today. Right.
Right.
And we have God's faith that, yeah, this is really what we can be.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cindy?
I love these discussions.
We love that you love them.
Okay, I'm making an assumption that may not be correct.
Uh-oh, careful.
But I'm assuming there will be some Episcopalians who do not want to hear this, do not want to deal with it. And how can we minister the right way to help those who aren't ready to hear it and at the same time proclaim it?
I think you have to live it and embody it and worry first, Cindy. I'm going to need to worry first about how I inhabit this place before I worry about how you inhabit this place. think Matthew said something about that, about trying to pick the speck out of your eye when I've got a plank in mine. I think that's where we start. And then I'm just going to go for it here, friends. Make it look compelling.
Thank you.
Oh, it could be that. It could be that.
Yeah. So I just put into the chat 2 biblical verses that are food for thought between this week and next week. And they are about the many members of the one body. And I'd like you to look at those verses and just think about them, wrestle with them, argue with yourself about them in light of caste.
And if you're on a phone, here are the verses. Romans 12, 3 through 8. Romans 12, 3 through 8. An oldie but a goodie. 1 Corinthians 12, 12 through 26. 1 Corinthians 12, 12 through 26.
Yeah, so have a really good argument with yourself and with those scriptures about, you know, what it says about caste and our experience of caste. So next week, we're finishing up the book. We have sections, 5, 6, and 7. Section 7 is quite short. So we try to divide these so you weren't reading, well, too much more than 100 pages per week. So yeah, we'll finish up the book next week. Anything you want to add, Bishop Bondi, before I close us out in prayer?
Friends, Tuesday evening is when we'll be having our service with a number of other dioceses. I think at least 10 or 11 other dioceses are participating in this service. Michael Curry, our presiding bishop, is preaching in this service. We've got some good representation from the Diocese of Michigan helping with it. That service will air at 8 o'clock on May 25th, so 8 o'clock next Tuesday. We'll gather at 7:45 for just a little bit of conversation prayer on Zoom. And then Anna will put the link for the service in the Zoom chat, and it'll be up on our website, and it'll be going off our Facebook page, and anything Anna can say about that. And then after the service, we'll gather for some conversation. So I invite you to come. I invite you to share that we're having this service. If you've got a Facebook page, share it on your congregation's Facebook page, share it on your own. Because what I'd like to do is to really create marking what we're doing, marking Mr. Floyd's death nationally, and then motivating folks to act on this locally. So that's my piece for that, and then we'll gather on Wednesday. And Daniel, you get points for getting the Romans passage right into the chat like that. So I'm not sure what if we're gonna do something for Juneteenth, Carol. But get a group of people together, see what you can put together. So this could all flow lots of different ways. The Corinthians passage was too long to fit in the chat box. That's what I was thinking.
It's typical Paul.
Sister V, will you end us in prayer, please?
Yes, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Gracious God, we thank you for becoming truly human among us. You were a mirror held up to our own behavior and the secrets of our own hearts. Give us the courage not to turn away from that reflection, but instead to change ourselves so that we see in ourselves what you see in us. Beloved children, worth redemption. Bless us to take your eyes, your heart, your hands, your ears into a world that needs people to listen, to touch with healing, and to work to bring about justice and equity among us. Bless us to continue to build your holy reign here on earth. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everyone. I enjoyed that.
Very, very, very much. You guys are just fabulous conversation partners. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.